They were the couple viewers felt they already knew. The laughter in the dust, the trust in the pauses, the way hard work and hope shared the same frame. When the 5th season was named the last, it didn't land like a finale announcement. It landed like a quiet door closing somewhere behind the camera. Thinking about it brought mixed feelings, joy braided with grief, relief walking beside loss. Fame, after all, never shields anyone from the weight of real life. For years, Chip Gaines stood in the public eye as a man in motion, building, joking, pushing forward. Success seemed effortless, family unshakable, but then the rhythm changed. Something unseen shifted the ground beneath everything he had built. When the news arrived that altered their home life, it wasn't a headline moment. It was a private reckoning. And in that reckoning, Chip chose stillness over speed, presence over progress, family over everything else. His choice didn't come with a press release or a spotlight. It came with canceled plans, unanswered calls, and a deliberate step back from the world that had come to expect him everywhere. He didn't disappear, he redirected. For the man who once thrived on momentum, the decision was simple. When the person you built your life with needs you, you don't negotiate. You stay. Comment or write reshaped Chip Gaines to honor them. Joanna Gaines had always been the steady center designing, guiding, holding space for beauty while life rushed around her. Then came a season that demanded rest instead of motion. The whispers began when her presence grew quieter, when production slowed and familiar updates faded into silence. What the public eventually learned was only part of the story, a serious health challenge that required surgery, recovery, and patience. She shared a moment from a hospital bed, composed and gentle, yet the words carried a gravity that lingered. For someone used to shaping environments and leading teams, the call to stop was profound. Healing reshaped her day's therapy, careful. Movement, learning to listen to her body in ways she never had before. The world noticed the change. Meetings happened without her. Appearances thinned, and yet she remained just differently. Her voice grew softer, more reflective, finding meaning in quiet and value in rest. For her audience, it was a reminder that strength sometimes looks like stepping back. Behind that choice was a partnership that held firm. Joanna didn't walk this path alone. She was surrounded by intention, protection, and the unspoken promise that home would come first. Comment or write reshaped Joanna Gaines to honor them dot as the parents slowed. The next generation began to appear not as replacements, but as learners. Ella Gaines moved gently into view, not pushed, not announced, simply present. Creativity seemed to call to her the same way it once called to her mother, through brainstorming moments and quiet involvement. Nothing was formal, nothing rushed, just curiosity and choice. She absorbed the rhythms of the work and the values behind it, learning that contribution doesn't require a spotlight. Her presence felt like a continuation rather than a transition, a reminder that growth can happen quietly. In a family careful about privacy, her moments were small but meaningful, suggesting a future guided by intention rather than expectation. Comment or write reshaped Ella Gaines to honor them. For Duke, the world unfolded outdoors in fields, among animals, alongside a father who had learned to slow down. These weren't staged lessons or performances. They were ordinary days made meaningful by attention. Feeding animals, walking land, sharing silence. In those moments, work became grounding rather than consuming. The lessons weren't about television or legacy. They were about stewardship, patience, and presence. Duke's role wasn't defined by cameras, but by connection, learning the value of effort through lived experience. Comment or write reshaped Duke. To honor them, crew followed a similar path. Small hands learning big responsibilities, childhood unfolding without urgency. His world was shaped by soil and routine, by the safety of being near rather than seen. The family's careful approach ensured that growth came without pressure, that identity formed away from public demand. In a household navigating change, Crew's days remained rooted in simplicity, reflecting the values his parents held close. Together, these children weren't stepping into a brand, they were being prepared for a life beyond it. Comment or write. Rip Crew to honor them. ****. The shifts didn't stop at the household door. They echoed outward, settling into the wider Magnolia world in subtle ways that loyal viewers could feel even if they couldn't immediately explain. The network that once pulsed with constant premieres and familiar faces began to breathe differently. Programs appeared with more space between them. Some series paused without ceremony. Others returned with a quieter tone, less urgency, more intention. It wasn't a collapse. It was a recalibration. Longtime followers noticed how the energy had softened, how the push for constant output had given way to something more measured. Where there had once been momentum for momentum's sake, there was now patience. The story being told wasn't about expansion anymore. It was about sustainability. Fixer Upper. Welcome Home had marked a return that felt celebratory, a reminder of why people connected to Chip and Joanna in the first place. But after that return, the pace slowed. A limited hotel project appeared, carefully produced, contained, almost reflective in its execution, and then nothing rushed to follow it. No bold announcements, no promises of what was next. Just space. In that space, viewers began to understand that the pause wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Magnolia wasn't disappearing. It was choosing restraint. Behind the scenes, creative teams adjusted. Leadership roles shifted. Designers, producers, and contributors stepped forward, carrying more responsibility, finding their own voices within the framework Joanna had built over years. Her influence remained everywhere, in the tone, the aesthetic, the philosophy, but her physical presence was lighter. The brand learned to function without constant direction from its founder, a testament to the foundation she had laid long before stepping back. Chip's absence was equally noticeable, though it carried a different weight. Once the constant spark, the unpredictable force at the center of promotions and appearances, he now surfaced only occasionally. When he did, it was in moments that felt grounded and personal rather than performative. A walk through the land, a shared task, a brief reflection. The humor was still there, but it was tempered, shaped by perspective. Those who had followed him for years recognized the change not as loss, but as growth. Faith, always present, but never loudly marketed, became more visible in its quiet consistency. It wasn't displayed through slogans or spectacle. It showed up in choices, the choice to turn down opportunities, to step away from stages, to prioritize healing and togetherness. For Chip and Joanna, belief wasn't an accessory to success. It was the framework that allowed them to navigate uncertainty without panic. Prayer wasn't a last resort. It was a daily practice, woven into decision-making and family life alike. Their community mirrored that approach. Support came without fanfare. Familiar faces showed up not as spectators, but as neighbors. In a town that had watched their rise, there was an understanding that some seasons require privacy more than praise. The Gaines family didn't need to explain themselves. Their consistency had already told the story. As the months passed, the public's curiosity remained, but so did respect. People sensed that what was happening wasn't a retreat born of fear, but a pause rooted in clarity. The pressure of constant visibility hadn't broken them, it had refined them. Joanna's reflections grew deeper, her words more inward-facing, inviting readers to consider their own pace, their own need for rest. Chip's actions spoke louder than any interview ever could. Together, they modeled a version of success that wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, and wasn't dependent on constant validation. Magnolia continued to exist across screens, pages, and shelves, but its heartbeat had slowed to match the life at its center. And in that slowing, something meaningful emerged, a reminder that even the most public lives are still lived privately first. That behind every brand is a family, behind every pause a reason, and behind every decision a set of values that doesn't change just because the cameras do. This chapter wasn't an ending. It was a recalibration, a necessary breath taken after years of motion. The story wasn't about walking away from what they built. It was about protecting it by knowing when to stop pushing. And as the world watched from a distance, Chip and Joanna Gaines continued forward, not at the pace the public expected, but at the pace their lives required. Time has a way of revealing what matters most, especially after the noise fades. For Chip and Joanna Gaines, the passing months didn't bring a return to old rhythms. Instead, they leaned further into the new one they had chosen. The absence of constant updates slowly became its own message. They weren't withholding, they were living. And in doing so, they redefined what visibility could look like when health, faith, and family took precedence over expectation. Joanna's recovery continued quietly, marked not by milestones shared online, but by gradual strength reclaimed in private. Healing wasn't linear, and it wasn't hurried. Each day asked something different of her, and she met it with the same intentionality she once brought to design plans and creative briefs. Those closest to her spoke of resilience that didn't need an audience, the kind that shows up in consistency, patience, and the willingness to let others carry what she once held alone. Chip's role during this season evolved into something steadier, less visible but deeply rooted. He became the constant at home, the organizer of ordinary days, the one who absorbed the weight of decisions so Joanna didn't have to. Where once he thrived on big ideas and fast movement, he now found purpose in repetition school schedules. Meals, quiet evenings, the unnoticed work that holds a household together. It was a transformation that surprised some but made perfect sense to those who knew him best. Friends described him as present in a way that felt new, not distracted, not pulled in multiple directions, just there. The man who once filled rooms with energy now filled space with calm. And while the world speculated about what he had stepped away from, those inside his circle understood what he had stepped toward. The children felt that shift too. With both parents more grounded at home, the family dynamic grew more centered. Conversations slowed, traditions deepened. Ordinary moments carried more weight. Ella continued to explore creativity without pressure, learning not just how things are made, but why intention matters. Duke and crew grew comfortable in the routines of land and labor, absorbing lessons that don't come from instruction, but from example. This wasn't a family retreating from the world in fear. It was a family recalibrating its center. The values that once guided a business empire were now being reinforced at the dinner table, in quiet mornings and in evenings untouched by schedules. The children weren't being prepared for fame. They were being prepared for life, one that could hold success without being defined by it. Meanwhile, the Magnolia brand continued its quieter evolution. Content leaned into storytelling rather than spectacle. Contributors spoke with authenticity rather than polish. The tone across platforms reflected reflection instead of urgency. It was as if the brand itself had taken a breath, mirroring the lives of those who created it. This wasn't decline. It was maturity. Viewers who stayed noticed the difference. The connection didn't weaken, it deepened. People saw themselves in the pause, in the permission to step back without apology. Joanna's written words resonated more strongly than ever, offering reassurance that rest isn't failure and stillness isn't surrender. Chip's rare appearances felt meaningful precisely because they were rare. Speculation never fully disappeared, but it softened. Over time, curiosity gave way to understanding. Not every chapter needs to be documented. Not every season needs explanation. Some are meant to be lived quietly, protected from the noise that once demanded constant access. Through it all, faith remained the anchor. Not as a talking point, but as a lived reality. Decisions continued to flow from prayer, from discernment rather than impulse. The Gaines family didn't present themselves as having answers. They simply trusted the process of walking forward one careful step at a time. This season of their story reminds us that legacy isn't built only in what we produce, but in what we protect. In choosing health over hustle, presence over pressure, Chip and Joanna Gaines demonstrated a different kind of strength, one that doesn't chase applause, one that endures long after the lights dim, asterisk, as the public slowly adjusted to the quieter rhythm. Another truth settled in. This was not a temporary pause meant to reset and rush forward again. It was a long-term reordering. The Gaines family had crossed a threshold where momentum no longer defined success. Instead, discernment did. The question was no longer what's next, but what's necessary. And that distinction changed everything. For years, the Magnolia name had been synonymous with growth. More shows, more products, more reach. But growth without space can become weight. In this season, Chip and Joanna seemed to recognize that truth with clarity. They didn't dismantle what they built. They simply loosened their grip on it by allowing others to lead, by trusting the systems they had put in place. They proved that stepping back didn't mean abandonment. It meant confidence. Inside Magnolia's creative orbit, this shift allowed new voices to rise. Designers, chefs, writers, and makers who had long contributed from behind the scenes began to carry more visibility. The brand expanded not outward, but inward, rediscovering its original heart storytelling rooted in care, craft, and community. Joanna's influence remained unmistakable, but it no longer required her constant presence. Her vision had matured into something sustainable, something that could breathe on its own. Chip's distance from the spotlight also changed how people interpreted leadership. He was no longer the loudest voice or the most visible face, yet his impact was still felt. Leadership in this chapter looked like trust, like letting go of control, like choosing not to insert himself where others were ready to stand. It was a quieter authority, one that didn't need reinforcement through attention. At home, this translated into a different kind of fullness. Days were shaped by routine rather than deadlines. Meals weren't rushed. Conversations weren't interrupted by obligations pulling from every direction. The family didn't insulate themselves from the world, but they no longer organized their lives around it. That boundary, carefully maintained, became one of their greatest strengths. The children grew within that boundary, learning that worth isn't measured by visibility. They saw firsthand that it's possible to build something meaningful and still walk away when it asks too much. That lesson, perhaps more than any inheritance or opportunity, will shape who they become. For those watching from the outside, this chapter offered an unexpected mirror. In a culture that celebrates constant output, the Gaines family modeled restraint. In an era of oversharing, they chose discretion. And in a moment when many feel pressure to explain every choice, they allowed silence to speak. It was a reminder that not all clarity comes from answers. Sometimes it comes from consistency. Joanna's reflective tone continued to ripple outward, resonating with people navigating their own seasons of change. Her words didn't instruct. They invited. They offered permission to rest, to reassess, to honor limits without guilt. Chip's example reinforced that message through action rather than commentary. Together, they demonstrated alignment between belief and behavior, between public identity and private life. This alignment is what ultimately studied them, not strategy, not branding, but a shared commitment to values that predated fame and would outlast it. Faith remained their compass, not steering them toward certainty, but giving them peace amid uncertainty. Community remained their support, present without expectation. Family remained their priority, non-negotiable and protected. The story, then, was never about stepping away from television or slowing a network. It was about choosing wholeness over haste, about understanding that some seasons ask for expansion, while others ask for care, and about trusting that honoring the latter doesn't undo the former. It preserves it as this chapter continues to unfold. It does so without spectacle, no countdowns, no declarations. Just a steady movement forward, guided by intention rather than noise. For those who have followed the journey from the beginning, that may be the most authentic evolution of all.